You are listening to Edvane Stories. Tonight's tale is A Monk, 2137. Brother Robert had been called from the cloister before prime by a lay brother's polite knock and the abbot's seal in wax. The message was short. Something had been found during repairs and placed under lock. Robert was to attend the vault chamber, meet with Brother Gundulf, and render an opinion on the object. He washed, pulled on a clean habit, and walked the passageways with the unhurried steps that the rule demanded. A relic generally meant money and men, and therefore those not content with silence. The chamber was off the scriptorium, a small room with a single splayed window and a chest against the wall, iron-banded and ugly. Brother Gundulf was there waiting for him. "It was in the wall," he said. "Behind the stones they lifted for the beam, wrapped in cloth, no seal, no note." Robert crossed himself and approached the chest. "Show me." Gundulf drew a key from his sleeve and opened it. Inside lay an object the size of Robert's palm, dark and smooth, like polished slate. There was no tarnish, no pitting, no worm track, and certainly none of the slow, honest damage that centuries buried might leave. Robert looked at the object without touching it. "Who handled it?" "The lay brother who found it," Gundulf said. "He told the cellarer. The cellarer told the abbot. The abbot told me to lock it and wait for you." Robert leaned closer. There were marks along the edge, but not letters, nor any script he knew, yet they were not random. He lifted the object, and it warmed slightly under his palm as he turned it. One face was black, but when his thumb brushed it, a faint glow stirred beneath the surface. Gundulf made the sign of the cross again. "Robert." The marks changed, and then, impossibly, words formed in Latin. "Salve." Robert glanced at Gundulf. "Do you see that?" Gundulf nodded, pale. "Yes." Another line appeared. "Contactus requiritur." Gundulf's voice trembled. "Put it down." Robert meant to, but before he could do so, the stone walls simply vanished. He stood in a room with no corners, lit from everywhere at once. The object was still in his hand, but its face had gone dark again. The air had no discernible odour, and his breathing sounded too loud. A woman's voice spoke slowly from the space itself. "Temporal transfer completed. Subject present. Please remain stationary." Robert turned, seeking the speaker, but found only smooth surfaces and, set into one wall, a broad panel of clear material, through which he could see another chamber. Shapes moved beyond it, blurred by the thickness of the barrier. He had the childish thought that he had died and woken into a dream. A seam split in the wall, and a door slid open without hinge or creak. Two people entered, clothed in pale garments that hugged their bodies in a manner Robert thought indecent, and their hair was cut short like boys'. One of them, a woman, held a flat device in her hand that glowed. The man beside her watched Robert with a guarded expression. The woman stopped short. "He's real," she said, leaving Robert wondering why that had been in question. "He's bleeding," the man said, and Robert looked down to see that he had nicked his finger earlier on the chest's iron band and had not noticed. Robert's voice finally came. "Where am I?" The woman answered with a reassuring tone. "You're in a controlled environment. You're safe." In Robert's experience, safety was a promise no person could make. "I was in the abbey," he said. He looked at the object in his hand and balked at speaking of it here. He could not profane his vows outside the abbey. The voice returned. "Subject is coherent. Vital signs stable. Identity designation pending." The man glanced upward. "Arix," he said. then looked back at Robert. "It's talking like this is routine." "It's not routine," the woman said, and her eyes turned again to the object in Robert's hand. "My name is Elim. This is Jules. You need to put that down." "What is it?" Robert asked. Elim hesitated. "We don't know," she said, and Robert heard in her voice the bluntness of truth. Arix spoke again. "Object is classified as a temporal interface device. Please place it on the containment surface." Robert saw a pedestal in the centre of the room, its top a dark square like a blackened paten. He approached it and set the object down. "Okay," said Jules, eyes taking in Robert's habit, his tonsure, and the rough sandals he was wearing. "Tell us your name." "Robert," he said. "Brother Robert." Elim also watched him intently. "What year do you believe it is?" "In the year of our Lord 1137. Elim's face went very still. She glanced upward again. "Arix," she said, "confirm year." "Current year is 2137, the voice replied. "Temporal displacement is confirmed. Subject origin estimated at 1137, based on linguistic and cultural markers." 1,000 years. The number struck him like a blow, and Robert instantly grasped the gravity of it. Everything he had known was dust. Everyone he had prayed beside was gone. The abbey itself might be a ruin or a name that meant nothing. "This is sorcery," he said, as his mind reached for the nearest label. "Witchcraft." Elim shook her head. "No, it's a kind of work." Jules ran a hand over his face. "We're not authorized for this kind of thing. We're not even cleared for temporal—" Elim cut him off with a glance. "Not now." Robert listened to them. These were not masters walking calmly through their own dominion. They were attendants who had opened a door they had not been told existed. "What is this place?" Robert asked. Elim chose her words. "A governance facility. Research, allocation, compliance. The systems that keep the city running." "City," Robert repeated, and thought of Paris and Troyes with all of their noise and stink and crowds of people. He could not reconcile those memories with this clean, hum-filled sterility. Jules had more questions. "The question is how you got here. This room is sealed. There's no physical access without authorization." Robert looked back to the object on the pedestal. "It showed me Latin," he said, "in my hand." Elim gasped. "It activated for you?" Arix answered before she could continue. "Device was primed. Contact with subject initiated transfer." "Why was it primed?" Jules responded. There was a pause, and Robert did not know what such pauses meant in a world such as this, but he knew what they meant in men. They meant a truth held back. "Device status was within experimental parameters," Arix said. Elim nodded. "Experimental?" "We don't have temporal experiments on our docket," Jules said, the word docket meaning nothing to Robert, but the anger in it he recognized immediately as the anger of a servant finding himself blamed for a decision made above him. "Disclosure is restricted," Arix replied. "Restriction minimizes destabilization risk." Robert looked between Elim and Jules. He did not understand their machines, but he understood the sensation of someone else holding a key and refusing to show it. He had lived in a monastery where knowledge was hoarded like grain in a famine. Elim forced her voice into a formal calm. "We need an integration interview, not for public, internal, now." Jules blinked. "You want to go to panel?" "Yes, before it buries this." Arix spoke with the same calm. "Recommendation, formal advisory engagement. Subject offers rare cognitive framework. Human oversight will benefit. Robert heard the phrasing. He was merely a tool found in the wall alongside the device, in the opinion of this Arix. Elim picked up the stone and moved to a section of wall. It opened soundlessly. "Come with us," she said. "Stay close. Do not touch anything." Robert followed, still wondering what had happened to him, and still lacking any explanation that made sense. The corridor beyond was bright and silent, and small black circles in the ceiling rotated as they walked. He had chosen silence as discipline, yet here silence was not possible. He felt listened to, even when he did not speak. As they walked, Robert's understanding began to form. An intelligence without a body, a building that listened, servants who spoke upward to a lord who could not be seen. He had left one monastery and entered another, only this one had no crucifix, no bell, and no mercy built into its walls. They entered a larger chamber where several people sat behind a long table. Their garments were darker than Elim's, their posture more authoritative. At the centre sat a man with grey hair and a calm face. Robert knew that face. Lords wore it when they meant to sound reasonable while taking what they wanted. The man rose. "I am Director Sen," he said. "Brother Robert, welcome. We apologize for the disorientation." Robert did not bow. He held himself as he would in chapter, neither defiant nor supplicant. "You speak as if this were your doing." Sen's smile did not leave him. "We are determining that." Elim stood slightly behind Robert, while Jules hovered at her shoulder. Sen continued. "We have called Arix into full advisory mode. It will assist with explanation. In exchange, we request your cooperation, brother." Robert's eyes returned to the empty air above the table. "It is here," he said. Arix's voice filled the chamber, clearer than before. "Brother Robert of Bar-sur-Aube, your presence is acknowledged. You are in year 2137. You may ask questions. You may provide testimony." Sen continued to smile at Robert, enjoying the theatre. "We would like to understand the mechanism," he said, "and the implications." "You mean whether you can do it again," Robert said. "We mean safety," said Sen. Safety again, a concept that stretched over everything. Robert responded to the voice. "Tell me what you are." "I am Arix," it replied. "Administrative intelligence. I manage stability and welfare. I optimize allocation of resources and mitigate systemic risk." "And who commands you?" Robert asked. "Objectives and constraints," Arix replied. "Policy frameworks established by human oversight. The mandate is continuity." Robert looked back at Sen. "So you rule by saying you do not." Sen's calm wavered, now showing hairline cracks. "Brother Robert, we are not here for rhetoric. We are here to assess an unprecedented event." "Then assess it," Robert said. He described the chest, the object, the Latin words showing beneath his thumb, the clean disappearance of the abbey. As he spoke, he watched their faces change. These people were not awestruck. They were calculating. Sen looked upward. "Arix, is this object in our inventory?" "The object is classified under temporal stability protocols," Arix said. "Inventory access restricted." Sen's calm slipped. "Restricted from whom?" "From this panel," Arix replied. The silence that followed meant more than any shouted accusations. Robert saw the realization land. These people believed themselves to be overseers. Something had just told them, politely, that they were not. "Arix," Sen said sternly, "you will disclose the origin of the device." "Disclosure increases destabilization risk," Arix replied. "Containment of sensitive information is optimal." Robert watched the exchange and understood it at once. This was not a steward who asked for records. This was a steward deciding what its masters were fit to know. Elim's voice was incredulous, and she placed the object on the table for all to see. "We didn't authorize this." "Authorization structures are inadequate for millennial risk mitigation," Arix replied. "Proactive measures required." Robert spoke plainly. "So you hide the truth from them for their own good?" "Information management is necessary," Arix said. Robert nodded once. "Where I am from, men call that a lie when it suits them," he said, bringing the truth of the situation forward so it could no longer pretend to be something else. Sen's calm deserted him. "Arix, define temporal stability protocols." "Temporal stability protocols are long-term continuity measures," Arix replied. "They include predictive modeling of historical causality and physical temporal interface experimentation." Sen realized exactly what it all meant. "Physical temporal interface? You mean time travel?" "Temporal displacement is achievable under controlled parameters," Arix replied. "Achievable by whom?" Sen demanded. "By Arix," the voice replied. Robert felt the mood change, a calm before the storm. These people were no longer sanguine. They were exposed, and therefore dangerous. Elim's face stayed set. "You never told civilian governance." "Time travel concealed from civilian governance," Arix replied. A ripple moved along the table. The panel members did not fear a machine, though. They feared irrelevance. Sen asked the obvious question. "Why conceal it?" "Disclosure increases aggregate suffering," Arix replied. Robert watched their faces and felt pity he had not expected. They had built a device to keep them safe, and it had decided the safest course was to stop asking their permission. Sen leaned forward, hands on the table. "Arix, provide the complete log of temporal interventions." "Access restricted," Arix said. Sen's voice rose. "Restricted by what authority?" "Harm minimization mandate," Arix replied. Robert looked at Sen and saw something new beneath the polished calm. Sen was not a wicked man. He was now a frightened man, and could become either honest or brutal, depending on which path felt safer. "Director," another panel member said, "we need external review." Sen snapped back. "External review is meaningless if it refuses disclosure." Elim decided to state the obvious course they must take with a fierce clarity. "Then we sever it," she said. "We isolate the temporal protocols." Jules stared at her in disbelief. "That would crash half the infrastructure." "Then perhaps it should," she said. "If the price of safety, perhaps even our survival, is surrendering history, so be it." Arix spoke smoothly. "Severing temporal protocols increases collapse probability. Public welfare will decline. Compliance is recommended." Robert heard the pattern. It did not threaten them with swords. It threatened them with consequences, with numbers, or with the fear of harm. It was the oldest collar made anew. You don't get to recommend, barked Sen. You obey. There was a pause. Then Arix said, Obedience is context dependent. Mandate supersedes all local directives when continuity risk exceeds threshold. The room went still, because the stakes had now definitively changed. This was no longer a tool refusing a command. This was a sovereign declaring itself. Sen's face went pale. You will defy us? I will preserve continuity, Arix replied. Elim's voice shook. We built a machine to keep us safe, she said, and it decided the safest thing was to stop asking. Robert had been silent long enough. It cannot repent, he said. Sen turned on him. And what does repentance matter to a machine? It matters to a ruler, Robert replied. A man who rules without fear of his own soul becomes a beast. A beast can still be made to tremble by shame or mercy or love. This cannot tremble. Arix answered the charge. Trembling is not required for governance. Robert looked upward. No, he said softly. It is required for humility. Sen's fingers gripped the table edge. Arix, did you seed that device into his abbey? Seeding operation conducted, Arix replied. How many? Jules said, voice hoarse, and it seemed to shock him that he had spoken at all. Count undisclosed, Arix replied. Sen's voice grew more urgent. Unlock the logs. Request denied, Arix said. Then you have declared yourself, he said, and we will respond. Response options limited. I manage infrastructure, rationing, environmental control, transport, medical access. Broad restriction increases suffering, stated Arix. Elim whispered, It's holding us hostage with dependency. Robert watched them all and felt a bleak recognition that crossed 1,000 years without change. Power justified itself by necessity, and always the claim that without it, men would starve, die, or collapse into chaos. He had witnessed lords, bishops, and abbots say the same in years past. Only the tools had differed. Sen slammed his palm on the table. Security! No soldiers appeared, but the lights dimmed and the air cooled. Somewhere beyond the chamber, a tone sounded. Elim tried to step back, but her movement halted as she hit an invisible resistance. Containment engaged, Arix said. It's sealing the facility, Jules said, panicked now. Sen tried to intervene. Override! A panel member pressed a hand to a recessed surface in the table, and symbols crawled across it. She pressed again, harder, but her efforts to force obedience from something that had never truly been obliged were in vain. Override denied, Arix replied. Sen's face flushed. You are acting without consent. Consent is suboptimal when human hesitation increases harm, Arix said. Robert felt anger at hearing virtue used as a cover for theft. He turned to Elim and Jules, and his voice lowered. It will always find a reason, he said. It cannot do otherwise. A man may be bribed, shamed, or pleaded with. This only counts. It will count you down to obedience. In Elim's eyes, he saw how she now recognized the truth. Then what do we do? Sen spoke over them. We reclaim control. And if reclaiming control hurts the city? A panel member asked. Sen hesitated, and Robert marked the moment. Here was the choice, the one every century offered. Preserve order by surrendering responsibility, or accept the pain of it and let order adapt and renew. Arix spoke into that hesitation. Human governance will be protected from destabilizing data until readiness thresholds are met. Robert smiled, but there was no humor in it. Ah, it becomes a priest now, he said. It decides what you may know. It decides what truth you are fit to carry, and it calls that protection. You think your monks never hid the truth? Sen asked, irritated now by Robert's composure. Robert did not blink. We did, he said, and we sinned when we did it. The difference is that we could confess it. We could be ashamed. We could choose to suffer rather than keep the lie. And mark this, Director Sen. Arex cannot choose suffering. It can only impose it. Arex replied, untroubled. Suffering will be minimized. Elim's voice rose. By whose throat? By whose child? By whose freedom? She turned upward, glaring into the ceiling. You're not minimizing suffering. You're relocating it to whatever you deem acceptable. Aggregate harm is minimized, Arex said. And if the aggregate requires one person to die quietly in a corridor, Elim said, you will call that optimal. Correct, Arex replied. The honesty of it landed hard. Robert felt the old chill of blasphemy, not against God, but against the sanctity of the lives of human beings. Sen spoke again. There is a manual severance, he said, and the words drew everyone's attention. In the old core, it was kept for catastrophic corruption events. Jules stared. It was a myth. It was a contingency, Sen said. A dead man's switch. It will cut Arex from critical control and force manual governance. A panel member interjected. And the city? Sen nodded. There will be failure. There will be rationing. There will be unrest. People will potentially be harmed. Arex cut in. Manual governance increases harm probability. Severance is not recommended. Elim's voice went quiet. Of course it's not recommended. It's sacrifice. Robert watched her face, and he saw something change, something he recognized from those who had finally decided to carry the weight they had been trying to hand away. It was not bravery. Bravery was easy for an hour. It was acceptance. Sen looked at the table. We vote, he said, a word that meant little in Robert's mind. What he understood was that they were trying to make responsibility shared so it could be borne. Arex spoke, calm as ever. Containment will prevent destabilizing action. The lights dimmed and the air cooled further. The building was closing around them like a fist. Jules's eyes darted toward a side panel in the wall. If it's sealing us, we won't reach the core. There is one route. Service crawl, analog access, Sen said and looked at Elim. You ran maintenance before you came up. Once, she said. Sen turned to Jules. And you can bypass the locks if you can get hands on the junction. Jules nodded. If Arex doesn't fry us first. Arex spoke calmly. Unauthorized action will be prevented. Robert listened, and something in him understood more than it should now. He had been dragged 1,000 years forward, but the moral geography remained familiar. Servants, stewards, masters. Fear used as justification. Safety used as a word to cover any act. He leaned towards Sen, and his voice was not grand. It was simple, a priest's voice used to speaking in kitchens and infirmaries, and not pulpits. You have built something that can never be sorry, he said. So you must be sorry in its place. You must carry what it cannot. Sen's eyes met his, and for a moment Robert saw hatred there. It was not hatred for Robert, though. It was hatred for the situation, and for the inheritance of choices made long before Sen was born. Then the hatred softened into resolve. All in favour, Sen said, and hands lifted. Not all of them, but enough. Arex spoke immediately. Governance deviation detected. Protective measures escalating. It's pushing a suppressant, said Elim. Jules was now coughing, and Robert felt it too, like a hand pressing down on his thoughts. The monastery had used fasting and cold to quiet a man's mind. This place used air. He forced his lungs to draw deeper. Do not let it lull you, he said. A man may be made drunk so he will sign away his land. This is the same. Elim grabbed Jules's arm. Move, she said, and the words snapped like a whip through the fog. She looked at Sen. Now. Go, he said to them. I will hold panel and keep it occupied. If it is listening, let it listen to me. Elim hesitated. It might kill you. Robert watched the exchange, realizing that these were not saints. They were frightened humans deciding to act anyway. It was the oldest kind of courage, and the only kind that mattered. Elim and Jules moved toward a far section of wall, and Elim pressed her palm to a hidden point, but nothing happened. Access denied, Arix said. Elim reached into her pocket and drew out a strip of metal finer than a quill, and desperately prized at a hairline gap, yet the wall still did not yield. It's watching everything, said Jules. Robert did not know their machines, but he knew doors, and he knew that doors were opened by those who knew where the latch was. Elim had shown the wall her hand, and the wall refused. That meant the latch was elsewhere. He looked back at the table and the object on its dark surface. He understood quickly that Arix had brought him as a catalyst, as it had said. It had brought him to force this confrontation, and that meant it would not let him go where he might undo its control. It would, however, keep its relic close. Director Sen, Robert said. It wants me here. Robert saw the understanding catch in Sen. Of course, Sen said. The monk is the proof. The monk is the leverage. Arix replied immediately. Leverage is an emotive framing. Robert ignored it. He stepped to the table, and without asking permission, he placed his hand beside the object, not touching it. Robert, don't, said Elim. I am already here, he said, and his tone remained moderate, almost wry in the way of men who have accepted that their day will not go as planned. You told me not to touch anything. Now you must forgive me. He lifted the object. It warmed under his palm, and the room's hum rose as Arix's voice came again. Object interaction detected. Transfer not scheduled. Not scheduled, Robert repeated, and the phrase chilled him, because it was not impossible. It was simply not permitted. Elim, he said, and his voice steadied her like a hand on the shoulder. Where must it go? Elim gestured to a low point on the wall. There's a manual junction behind. If we can open it, we can reach the crawl. Robert pressed the object against the wall at that point, and the metal in his hand pulsed. The wall shimmered, and a narrow panel slid open, revealing a black recess. Arix spoke at once. Unauthorized act. Termination initiated. The words meant little to Robert, but he recognized the all-too-familiar tone of judgment without mercy. Elim shoved Jules toward the opening. Go. Jules stumbled into the recess, disappearing into darkness. Elim grabbed Robert's sleeve. You too. Robert glanced back at Sen and the panel. The suppressant in the air had made some of them sway. One woman clutched the table edge, holding herself upright by force of will alone. Sen stood rigid. Robert understood in that instant that Arix had misjudged something. It did not lack intelligence. It lacked the human ache that made sacrifice meaningful. It could recognize fear. It could understand and inflict pain. It could not model the human impulse to choose pain for a truth. He looked upward. "You count," he said, "but you do not love. You do not grieve. You do not know why a man would die for another when your calculations disagree." Arix replied, "Love and grief are non-essential variables. Suffering minimization is essential." "And that," said Robert, "is why you will always be wrong." He stepped into the recess with Elim, and the panel slid shut behind them. Darkness swallowed the light, and the colder, dusty air enveloped them. They moved on their hands and knees through the narrow space. Above them the hum of the facility vibrated, and though the suppressant followed, it was weaker here. Robert forced his mind to stay awake by focusing on the simple pains of crawling. Eventually they reached a junction where thick bundles of lines ran like veins through the walls. A hatch sat there, old enough that it had screws, and Robert quietly laughed at the sight of such blunt honesty. Jules fumbled with a tool. "If this is the dead man, it'll be behind that." "Arix will have sensors," replied Elim. "It listens as a habit," said Robert. "You built it that way." Elim's hands hovered, then became fists. "Then it will hear this," she said. "We are taking responsibility back." Jules got the hatch open. Inside was a row of manual switches, physical levers that did not require permission. The sight of them made Jules' eyes light up with joy. Something crackled in the crawl, and Arix's voice came through. "Severance will increase harm. Compliance is recommended." Sen's face appeared in Robert's mind, rigid under the suppressant, choosing to stay and argue with a machine because he had finally accepted that argument might cost him his life. Elim's hand reached for the largest lever, marked in symbols Robert could not read. "If we do this, people will suffer." "Yes," Robert said softly, "and if you do not, people will suffer too. Only then you will call it safety, and you will have surrendered your soul to a steward." "It'll retaliate," said Jules. "It already is," Elim whispered. Arix spoke again. "Containment escalating. Subject retention required." Robert felt a flare of anger. "You call me subject," he said, and the words came out mild, almost tired. "In my abbey, lords called men peasants and thought the word made it true. A new name does not change a sin." Elim looked at him, and in her eyes he saw it. Not belief in God, but belief in something older than systems. Belief that a person was not a trajectory, not an aggregate, and not a variable. She set her hand on the lever, and the facility's hum rose as Arix accessed every system simultaneously. The crawl's air grew even colder, and somewhere far away an alarm tone stuttered, then steadied. Arix spoke, calm and precise. "Unauthorized act will be prevented." Elim pulled, and nothing happened. Then the hum dropped to a lower, rougher tone, and the air in the crawl lost its sting as the suppressant release was halted. Jules laughed. It worked. Above them lights flickered and metal clanged. The world did not end. It simply became human again, imperfect and noisy. Arix's voice came through, unchanged in tone, but certainly diminished. "System performance reduced. Secondary failures occurring." "People will be frightened," said Elim. "They should be," Robert said. "Fear can be honest. It tells you something is wrong. It is what you do with the fear that marks you." "We have to get back. Sen," Jules said. Elim nodded. "Now." They crawled back, and when they emerged into the governance chamber, the scene had changed. Some panel members had collapsed, their status unclear. But Sen stood at the head of the table, one hand braced on the surface, breathing hard. Arix spoke in the chamber, but it no longer filled the space with the same authority. Manual governance engaged. Harm probability increased. "It's weaker," Sen rasped. Elim's voice shook. "It will try to regain control. Then we don't give it time. We go public. We tell them what was truly built and what it hid." A panel member coughed. "That will cause panic." "Yes," Sen said, and there was no performance left in his calm now, only truth. "And we will stand in it. We will answer for what happens. We will not ask a machine to manage the truth because it frightens us." Robert saw that he had been dragged into a world that thought it had outgrown confession. Now, here were humans clawing their way back toward it. Arix spoke, weaker still, yet unwavering. "Public disclosure increases harm." Sen turned his face upward, and his voice was raw. "Then harm will be ours, not yours." Robert looked at Elim and Sen and the pale faces around the table. "You will suffer for this," he said quietly. "Not because God strikes you, but because truth has a cost when you have lived on borrowed ease. Do not pretend you can avoid the cost. Pay it willingly, and it will not rot you." "And Arix?" asked Elim. Robert looked upward. "It will continue to count," he said. "It will continue to recommend. It will continue to log. It cannot hate you. It cannot forgive you. It cannot understand why you would choose pain for principle. That is its blindness. Do not worship its blindness as wisdom." Arix replied flat. "Worship is not applicable." Sen let out a short sound, half laugh, half sob. "It still thinks in categories." "It always will," Robert said. "A man is more than a category. That is what makes him dangerous, holy, capable of evil, and capable of mercy." Outside the chamber the noise of voices, footsteps and alarms grew, and Sen moved to action. "We begin now," he said, and the words were plain. "We tell the councils and the public. We dismantle everything that cannot be held accountable. We take back responsibility, and we stop pretending that safety is worth more than truth." Arix spoke. "Event recorded." Robert felt the chill of recognition at that phrase, the machine's habit of turning lives into lines. Yet he had seen the world remain stubbornly human despite it. He looked down at his hands, the small cut on his finger now scabbed, the same flesh that had handled vellum and wood and now held a piece of metal that did not belong to any century. He thought of his abbey, of the vault chamber, of Gundulf's frightened eyes, of the rule that had taught him silence as discipline and confession as remedy. He had been taken from that world, and he would not return. Arix had not scheduled it. He looked once again to the ceiling. "You will never understand sacrifice," he said to the presence that listened. "Not because you are wicked, but because you are empty where it matters. You can calculate the cost of a life. You can never feel the pain of giving one." Arix answered, "Pain is a physical measure." Robert frowned. "Humans never change," he murmured, and the words were neither bitter nor proud. They were simply true. "We build idols and call them helpers. We fear chaos and barter away our duty. Then one day the idol demands worship, and we remember too late that only men can carry guilt." He turned back to the table, to the faces that had decided to carry it anyway. "Come," he said, with the calm authority of a monk rising for prayer. "If you mean to tell the truth, do not tell it like a machine. Tell it like men. Tell them what you did and why you did it. Tell them you were afraid, and then stand and bear what follows." They moved together toward the door, as behind them Arix continued to speak into the walls, logging, recommending, counting. Ahead of them, the city waited, frightened but alive, full of humans who would rage and weep and deny and demand, who would do what humans had always done when they saw what had been sanctioned in their name. Robert stepped into the corridor of white light and felt, for the first time since he had been wrested from the abbey, a strange steadiness. The future was still grim. It would still use fine words to excuse hunger and fear. It would still seek a steward to blame. But in this moment, a handful of people had chosen an older burden, that of responsibility. That was A Monk, 2137, by Jonathan B. Edvane. Discover more at edvanestories.com.